G'day team, Hamish here from Automower Tech, and we're going to talk about guide wires. So how do you install your guide wire, not physically lay it, but where you're going to locate your guide wire in your install and how it basically works. Starting off with like your basic one guide wire system on an open lawn, and then towards the end of the video, if you want to stick around, we will talk about more advanced things with guide wire, such as driveway crossings, crossing across islands, and a little bit more in depth than that. So the first thing you need to work out is where your charge plate's going to go and which model you have. So there's 1, 2 or 3 guide wire systems in Husqvarna Automowers. So all your smaller models, so your 305, 405, 310s, 315s, they're all going to have one single guide wire. So you're going to have to utilize that guide wire as best as you can. But that's okay because they're designed to do more basic lawns. They can still handle a lot, but they're not going to be doing the size and complexity that further up models are going to be. So jumping from a 415, for example, you're going to go to a 430, and a 430 is going to have 2 guide wires. So this is when you can do a lot more when you've got 2 guide wires. You can access more remote areas. You can also obviously cover more area, and your mower is going to be performing better on an advanced lawn. You may get an installer that does measure up and says, oh, you need a 430 for this lawn, and a lot of people will be like, oh, I'm only 1200 square meters or whatever, why can't I just have the 415? And then your installer might explain to you, okay, well, the mower needs to go this direction and that direction. The other key thing to remember about guide wires is the mower not only uses the guide wire to return to the charge station, it's critical that the mower also uses it to exit the charge plate at times when it chooses to, along with its GPS navigation. It'll follow that guide wire to the end of the guide wire to the remote area and start mowing. And another option around guide wires is you can set up a distance and remote start points if you've got a non-GPS model, or you've turned GPS off because you believe the lawnmower can't handle how advanced your lawn is. I always recommend try GPS mowing for a start, unless you've got a real oddball install or something really complex. Then you might need to turn on areas and set each start point between 3 and 5 start points from the charge station. You can get the mower to start at a certain percentage. So we can't go into everything in one video. Guide wires is a pretty broad topic, so we will cut a lot of stuff out in this sort of topic today, just so we can fit the broad spectrum of a guide wire and how it works. So let's say for our first example, we've got a 1 guide wire system, and we want to choose where the charge plate's going to go. So keeping in mind that we have all this lawn all the way around through here, we could choose to have the charge plate anywhere we want. We've got a power point here, here and here, but we want that guide wire to go through as much of the install as possible. So the center of the whole lawn, the more a guide wire goes through the center of that lawn, the better it's going to catch that guide wire and go back to home more effectively. So in that case of a 1 guide wire system, when you've got a horseshoe sort of a lawn like this, you would want the charge plate to one side. So that's why we would choose the charge plate to go here, and then in that case we could wrap the guide through the lawn to the other end. That'll be guide 1. Now we've only got this bit of area here. The mower will bounce around. If it doesn't find a guide within an X amount of minutes, depending on what your finding charging station settings are set to, it'll follow the boundary and it will soon get back to the charge plate. And if it bounces around looking for a guide anywhere here, it's going to jump on that guide really, really fast. It's really hard for it not to hit a guide. So if we so that's your basic on your 1 guide wire system. If we stepped up to a 2 guide wire system, let's rub that out, we would then choose more central of the lawn. So a 2 guide wire system, often we have more complex lawn or larger lawn, so anything from 2 and above, you always want to have that robot mower more center to the lawn, so 50% of the lawn is to the left of the plate, 50% of the right. And then in that case, an ideal situation, you'd run 1 guide wire to the end there and the other guide wire to here. So then you would have guide 1 and guide 2. So then you would be covering way more of the lawn, and it's really, really difficult for the mower not to find that guide wire. And then the third example, which you wouldn't really fully need, another guide wire here. Let's say this lawn was twice the size, and we had this little bit of an area that went all the way down here, sort of thing, around through these trees and that. This is a bigger lawn now. We've just added another 1,500 square meters. We would run an additional guide wire through here to that remote point, and then we'd have guide 3. So that's roughly, so you can see in an ideal lawn or ideal world, we've covered everywhere it's really easy for the mower to bounce in and grab a guide wire. So someone in the comments is probably going to say at some point, okay, but that's all good, but you can only have a 400 meter guide loop. So when Husqvarna talks about a guide loop in the manuals, the guide loop is the boundary, so the black is the boundary here. So, and when the current comes out of the guide wire, follows out of the charge plate, along the guide, it's about 4.5 volts. That goes into the boundary is at 28 volts. And it's going to go all the way around here, right around the boundary. There's signal from that guide wire. And then back to the charge station. So from there, right away around the install and back to the charge station here, that is what Husqvarna calls the guide wire, known as a guide loop. So in literature, it's going to be, you're referring to each loop, each guide wire is containing a guide loop. So getting more advanced, that is more key to know how that works. But getting back to the original theory on that 400 meter limit, personally, I just ignore it, to be honest. If you've got an install that's too big on boundary wire, it'll be too big on a guide. And if you've got, you should have an install that's too big for wire, where a guide wire can't work. Saying that, I like to keep it under 150 meters for a guide. So an install like this, for example, our guide wires might be, this one here could be 90 meters easy, this one here could be 70, and this one could be, could be about 85. So it's easy to get that metrages of wire up. This is a really typical install for a 430 that I do have guide wires that would be about that long. Given that that is about 90 meters out there, and then the rest of the install around there, I don't find that to be too much of an issue. So that's the basic on how the guide wires work, how you want to set up the charge plate in relation to the guides. The second benefit of setting the guides up in such a way that you have 3 points, the mower is going to start here, 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 and from the plate as it chooses to. So often it'll follow a guide wire all the way out to these 3 points. So even if you do have a more basic install where you don't have anything that juts out and it's just all open and passing through, it's just a big oval, and you're like, oh, 2 guide wires doing it, don't want to put a third one in, can't be bothered. You should really be bothered because you're going to get more out of your mower. But you're adding another point that your mower's going to start to. So sometimes if I have a guide passing through an oval sort of a lawn or a horseshoe sort of a lawn, I'll split that third one up. So I've got telling the mower it can start here, here, and here. So the tail of where the guide wire enters the boundary wire is critical to getting that mower, assisting the mower to mow evenly. So an advanced mower like this in lawn, it's going to have GPS assisted navigation, but GPS is only accurate to 2 to 3 meters. So that's why guide wires are critical, because then it can eliminates the need of that accuracy for GPS. There are other models like the 550 EPOS and future models coming up that can go without wire, but that's a whole other topic. We're just talking about when you do have a wired system and you are using guide wires. So the next benefit to One, installing your guide wires, spreading them through your install so you have them all scattered so the mower picks them up easier. If you do get a break in your wire, then you're sectioning off your boundary from this join here to that join. If you can plug in this guide here and this guide here to the boundaries, and then check if you've got a loop here, if you've got a green light, or check the resistance down these wires. That's splitting your install into 3 chunks so it's easy to find a break. So if I get a 3 guide wire system and I know on my map this is how the wires are situated, I know here where that wire finishes and where this one finishes, and I test it and I find there's a break here, I know I can start searching the wire from here to locate that break. Likewise, I can check from here to locate the in between this break, but I know these other areas are good, so I don't have to try and search the whole boundary to find that break. So that's another benefit of installing the guide wires. But I always recommend always install all your guide wires. You're going to get a lot more out of your mower. It's going to perform better, and if you ever need the guide wires for like more assisted navigation like areas, then you can use them. So we'll move on to a more advanced guide wires. So I'll bring this one here up. So we've got charge plate here, we've got a driveway crossing, there's an island here, we've got a guide going all the way over here, we've got another guide coming to a remote area here, and then you'll see we've got a guide coming through the back here. So this is harder to navigate, and we've got 3 guides, so we're splitting it into 1, 2, 3 start sections. This will be harder to navigate to because there's a lot of scattered trees and it's behind the pond. We don't want this area to get missed, and we want the guide wire to be able to pick that mower up if it's mowing around here. You will notice in this example though, this guide wire here crosses over the islands. So a lot of people think that's not possible, but if you think about the guide loop again, gets a bit confusing, but we've got our guide loop that follows that boundary guide wire around and then round the whole exterior of the lawn. If we have the tail of that, the end of that guide wire there doesn't come in contact with that loop, then you're all good. So it means that the guide signal is not going to feed into any of the islands, and that is because of one key factor here. The signal from the charge plate comes out of the left and onto the boundary and loops around anti-clockwise around the whole install and then comes back in. So as long as that tail finishes on an anti-clockwise position from any of the islands, so the current is coming around the boundary this way, right around back to the charge plate, that guide wire can pass over as many islands as it wants along the way, as long as that island, the last island you go over, and where this tail is the tail is in an anti-clockwise position from any of those islands. So there's really no limitation to that. I've got many installs where they will go over 2 or 3 islands. Of course, I always avoid going over islands because I don't particularly want to keep the install more simple and trouble-free potential. But then there are many cases where you do go to some gardens and people are very creative, so you do need to come up with some good solutions. So in this case here, we passed over one for this block of trees here and garden pieces, and another one here within it here. The voltage and signal coming from that guide goes into the boundary and it joins everything else and goes in an anti-clockwise position. So nothing from the end of that guide wire is going to come out and feed into any of the islands. If we run this tail here and it stopped, say it went this way over that island and then joined into here, the signal from that would come back around here, go back around the island, then come back, and it will confuse the mower because that same signal is passing over the island wire as the guide wire. So that's a bit wordy, I'm not great explaining that, so you just got to keep the basic principle of the current is coming out of the charge plate, anti-clockwise around the install. As long as that tail is anti-clockwise from any island it goes over, then you can go over as many islands as you want. The other things you can't do with the guide wires is you can't cross them. So you can't have a guide wire coming over and crossing. That won't work. It's going to confuse the mower and balls it up. You also can't, some people want to or try to, especially with the one guide wire systems, they're like, oh, they want to split it and go here, so they've got two tails on one guide wire. You can't do that. It's going to confuse the mower again as well. I mean, the mower will mow until it needs a guide wire, and that's just going to get confused and it isn't going to operate properly. So that's something you can't do. Other things that you need to consider if you've got a driveway crossing or a really narrow passageway through somewhere, then you're really going to want a guide wire for it to do a good job of those areas where you might need a model with an additional guide wire. It is common that if you're going for a 430 in area, say you've only got like 2,500 square meters and you might want a 430, but your lawn's pretty complex, then often you are better to go to a 450. That's one example. Generally in that case you're better to go a 450 anyway, because they're a more capable unit than a 430 in that instant. So with your driveway crossings and narrow passageways, you always want a guide wire through there to assist it. You'd have your boundary at a minimum of 60 centimeters or 600 millimeters wide. Usually I go to about between 600 and 750 wide on a driveway crossing or a path or something like that. If I'm going through a narrow part in the hedge, then I can get away with 600 and it'll work fine, but if I've got a little bit more distance, I'll open it up a smidge more than the 600 minimum. And the one last thing that you can do with guide wires, so it's key that you come out straight from your charge plate. If you do have an instance where, let's say we didn't have these guide wires and we didn't have half this garden, but there was more garden on the other side of this driveway, and we needed two guide wires across there, so we could follow these two guide wires out 2 or 3 meters. We could veer away from the other guide, so we've got guide 1 and guide 2. So we've veered away to separate ourselves from guide 1 and 2. The trench here, you can have all 3 guide wires in that same trench. That's no worries. The mower's only ever going to pick up or use one signal at a time. So as long as those guide wires don't cross over each other, it won't get confused. It'll just grab which guide signal at once and it'll just follow on that one whether it's going out or in. But here you can go back and join back in the same groove, or lay that guide wire dead on top of each other like that in that instance. And then you're going back round to put that guide back into the boundary. So that's another example that people often think that you can't do. They want to keep all these guides completely separate. Like, you are going to want to keep them separate and spread them out as much as possible. But in this instant, if you needed 2 going that way over a narrow passageway, then you can have all of them coming out the same channel here to keep it nice and neat. Get a straight 2 meters out, and then you break away, and then you get back to here, and you can go back down the same channel again. So that's a quick rundown on guide wires. Hopefully you guys picked up something. The last thing I don't think I went through is corridor width. So when it comes to guide wires and corridor width, the corridor width is how far the mower zigzags on the way back along the guide. So it does this, the wider the corridor width is, the further it will go away from that guide. And this stops it making the same track along the guide, just going dead on every time, causing wheel tracks. So ideally you want that corridor width set to the max, which is 9. If you've got a narrow part through here, you might want to set it to like 4 or 5 so it doesn't smack into the boundary here. But even so, you could still often have that at 9 and it'll automatically go into passage handling mode when it gets to a situation like that. But the key about that, the corridor width and how the mower follows the guide wire back, is it always follows on the left hand side. You'll see through here when it's travelling back, when it's looking at the charge station, it's always going to be on the left side of the wire. Now that's key if you are going through round trees and stuff, because you would come the wire close to the trees on this side, leaving heaps of room on the left hand side for the mower to come up and zigzag through that area on its corridor width like that. Rather, if you put the wire on along this side here close to the trees, that mower's going to pick it up, and then on the way home it's going to bump into that tree, bump off, potentially lose the guide if it turns the wrong way, or it might turn around, come back, find the guide, come here, bump into it again, bounce off another tree, lost the guide, bounces around a wee bit more, follows the guide, and then smacks into the tree again. So you do have to be mindful of that it's going to follow the left hand side of the guide wire to get back, so you want to keep that side clear when you're installing the guide wire. Any questions, shoot them below, guys, and if there's something really tricky in there that you didn't quite cover in the install that you're thinking about doing, just leave me a message below and I might be able to do a separate video that someone else needs help on that. Guide wires is a pretty broad topic, so it's a little bit hard to put every scenario in there, so that's pretty generic. Awesome, guys. See you in the next one. Cheers.